Hello, everyone. So great to be here with you all. I'm Terri Lynn Heath, and I'm here to talk about our deep core. We're here at our Lunch and Learn, explore your deep core and strengthen your pelvic floor. If you have not done so, please register so that you can receive the full videos that I will be sharing portions of during our time together here. Whether you're watching live, whether you're watching the replay, you can still register to receive those videos. You can go to www.themovementpath.com/lunch-and-learn, or to my website, themovementpath.com, and you can be led there pretty easily. But just to repeat myself one more time, even if you're watching a replay, even if you're live on LinkedIn and you just want to be there, you don't have to join the Zoom with me, but you will be able to it will enable me to send you the full length videos that I desperately want to share with you. I'll repeat that a couple of times during our time together, just in case you didn't catch that, but there's the link. Okay, so what will we do during our time together? During our time together today, we will talk about the 3 layers of muscle that comprise the pelvic floor and what each layer is responsible for. The risks relative to the pelvis that occur during pregnancy, childbirth, and menopause. The role of pelvic physiotherapists versus that of coaches. How exercises and breathing techniques can impact the pelvic muscles. And lastly, exercises you can start today that will improve your awareness and the strength and tone of your pelvic floor. So before we get started, I'd like to take a moment and introduce myself to you so you know why I do what I do. It is my mission to empower women to understand the control they have over their health through movement. This is me with my 13-year-old daughter. My struggles with fertility and the fact that 5 of my 6 direct ancestors have passed in their 60s has defined my path to live an incredibly healthy life. My ultimate goal is to enjoy a health span of 105 years, to be here as long as I can with my daughter and beat the odds. Every choice I make is measured against this goal. So here we are talking about health. Through my studies and my work, I understand how much control we have over our health, and I am passionate about sharing information to get us to get to know our amazing bodies. By becoming aware of their functions, we can manage them with more care and compassion and redefine our relationship to our one precious body. Since today in the US, women do not have the right to choose their reproductive outcomes in many states, this only reinforces the disconnection with our bodies. By discussing subjects like menopause and the vital function of the pelvis, we can begin to reclaim our power and obtain the support system that we need. In my practice, I seek to empower women to become champions of their self-care. A little bit about my scope of practice. I like to say that I'm not a one-stop shop, and I'm honored to be one stop along your path. I have a large network of professionals to refer you to. If you need support, please reach out after we conclude here, and I will do my best to help you get the care you need. If you are a women's healthcare professional and would like to be included in my referral network, please reach out as well. So here we go. Let's get to it. Oh, one more thing. The information provided in this session is for educational purposes only. It is not to be utilized as medical advice. By continuing this session, you agree that the actions you take during and after this session are your full responsibility and not the responsibility of the Movement Path or Heath Global LLC. Thank you. So what is pelvic health? This definition of pelvic health is from the Baylor College of Medicine. Our pelvic health is considered paramount to our overall health. Since it houses so many organs and performs so many functions, including sitting, walking, running, creating, and birthing life, to name but a few, it is in our best interest that it is in its optimal condition. Simply put, your pelvic health contributes to your overall health. I'll take a minute and read the slide. Pelvic health is pelvic health is the best possible functioning and management of the bladder, bowel, and reproductive organs. It is not merely the absence of disease or weakness in these organs. Pelvic health plays an important role in complete physical, mental, social, and sexual well-being. So let's take a deeper look at our pelvis. Here's the anatomy of the pelvis. Let's take a moment or two and take this all in. What I'm struck by is the incredible job of the muscles in our pelvis responsible for holding up our organs. We see here on the left, this red band are our pelvic muscles. There are 3 layers here, and they have an incredible job to do to hold up all of our organs, and that's not even when pregnancy is in play. Over here on the right, you can see a cross-section of the different layers, and they're not layered 1, 2, 3, so to speak, but we will talk about each of these muscle groups as we move forward. The muscles of the pelvic floor stretch somewhat like a hammock between 4 points, from the coccyx to the tailbone to the pubic bone, and from side to side or laterally across the pelvic girdle. And they connect with ligaments and tissues onto the pelvic girdle. Let's take a deeper look at the 3 layers and what they're responsible for. Layer 1 is the urogenital triangle. Layer 2 is the urogenital diaphragm. And layer 3 is the deep pelvic floor. The urogenital triangle has 3 muscles: the ischiocavernosus, the bulbocavernosus, and the transverse perineal superficialis. The function of this layer is relatively unknown, but assumed that it contributes to sexual pleasure and function. The most superficial layer, whose role in women isn't well known, the 3 muscles that make up this layer likely contribute to sexual function and pleasure. This layer does contribute to continence since it includes the external urethral and anal sphincters. This layer does support the other layers of the pelvic floor. Here we have the urogenital diaphragm. This layer sits in the middle and includes internal urethral and anal sphincters, which control continence. When these muscles aren't working properly, a woman may have difficulty starting the flow of and controlling urine or feces. You can see that all the layers support continence, which is a favorable function and attribute. Incontinence of some form is very common in women during pregnancy and after childbirth and during the menopause transition and beyond. It can significantly affect quality of life and in most cases is very treatable with the correct guidance and support. So this deep layer is the layer that we're most familiar with and is often considered to be 2 muscle groups. In this deepest layer, the muscles work together with the surrounding fascia and connective tissue to lift and support the pelvic organs, thus preventing prolapse. They also contribute to maintaining continence. So all 3 layers work together to maintain continence. And here's another look, just a review of that one diagram that I showed a little bit ago, just to see the complexity of all of those muscle groups. The pelvic floor has a big job to do. It's consistently responding to breathing patterns and intra-abdominal pressure, even at rest. This is why breathing techniques can build pelvic floor control. Our core is like a canister, so you can imagine a soda can with our abdominals forming the sides, our diaphragm at the top, and our pelvic floor on the bottom. And a little more on this later when we practice the connection breath. A couple of things about pregnancy and postpartum and what the pelvis does during that time. Imagine all that weight on the pelvic muscles during pregnancy. I think that's probably why there are 3 layers. So the load bearing during pregnancy increases the pressure on the pelvic floor and organs of the pelvis. Pressure required during vaginal birth impacts surrounding tissue and muscle fibers, increasing risks of tearing. There is an increased risk of pelvic organ prolapse during this time and increased risk of incontinence. And prolapse, if I haven't mentioned it, I know that I haven't, is the tendency for the organs to come through the muscle lining. And so there are degrees of prolapse. So basically our organs get pushed down and are not able to be held by our muscles. So that's what prolapse is. And incontinence is the inability to control urine. And that has many different forms and levels and degrees as well. Among pregnant women, around 48% of those who have never given birth show signs of incontinence by week 30, and this rate increases to around 67% for those who have given birth before. So it's quite common and nothing to be embarrassed about. Here's a look at the risks and effects of perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause on the pelvis. And I want to emphasize that these conditions are more common than not, and we can impact them through exercise and treatment if we talk about them. Many of these can be impacted by exercise alone. So these include the decline in reproductive hormones causing thinning tissues, genitourinary syndrome of menopause, possibility of low tone, poor strength, poor coordination of the pelvic muscles, pelvic organ prolapse, incontinence or leaky bladder, and other pelvic floor dysfunctions like difficulties emptying the bladder and bowel and pelvic pain. The prevalence of prolapse and incontinence are less known since many women are embarrassed to speak about these sensitive issues. But having conversations like this one can open up the dialogue and make sure we are offering the support to women that we deserve. So if you think about it, our pelvic floor is under a lot of pressure for a good portion of our lives. Even if we aren't bearing children, we are subject to the effects of menopause for half our lives if we are lucky. So who can we look to for support? If you're having symptoms that affect your quality of life, seeking a pelvic health physiotherapist is an option for you. Let's take a minute and talk about what a physiotherapist does. Now, a physiotherapist is also known as a physical therapist in the US. Physiotherapists are physical therapists in every other part of the world besides the US. So it's used here because it's often used in my own studies, but we know them in the US as physical therapists. So physiotherapists or physical therapists in the US can diagnose and treat musculoskeletal pain. They can guide modifications for general exercise during pregnancy and menopause, and they can manage pelvic floor dysfunction and conditions. They can guide optimal recovery from birth and surgeries. Coaches or trainers or physical trainers can perform initial pelvic screening in the form of questions. They can refer to a pelvic health physiotherapist as necessary, teach the connection breath and utilize it in training, which we'll do today, encourage open communication about current symptoms, and adjust programming as necessary. They can also include exercises and training to strengthen the pelvic floor. I just want to make sure you guys can't, or that I'm showing the right things. I'm not totally sure, but I know that somebody will ping me if there's a problem. Please do if there's a problem. Okay. And if you are having symptoms that affect your quality of life, seeking a pelvic health physiotherapist is an option for you. Coaches are also an important part of your support system. I strongly believe in coaches, and I will always have a coach of some sort. We likely will spend more time with our coaches and trainers than any other part of our healthcare team. They can be relied on to connect you to the right people based on your unique situation and can be trusted with sensitive information. Here are some traits I recommend you look for in working with physiotherapists and coaches to maximize your support system and your efforts. It's important that you feel comfortable enough with your care team, including your trainer or coach, so you can get the care and guidance you deserve. For physiotherapists, I recommend a therapist who is trained in pelvic dysfunction and treatment specifically, since physical therapists are special, or they are qualified to work with the entire body and treat the entire body. It's important that if you are working with your pelvis and issues of your pelvic specifically, that you do look for a trainer, or excuse me, a therapist who is professionally trained in the pelvis specifically. And if you need help with that, I can help. Also, the Menopause Society is a wonderful resource for pelvic health physiotherapists. You can also look for a therapist who's willing to work with your allied healthcare team, including your trainer or coach. So somebody who realizes and understands the value of working with a full team. And a physiotherapist who integrates joint strength function into their practice. That's my preference, as joint strength is so important to our mobility, and it definitely is trained differently than muscle groups. So that would be my preference, my recommendation for you. And anyone who is looking to strengthen their pelvis and has any conditions like prolapse or severe incontinence or other dysfunctions. And coaches or traits and coaches you could look for: a coach who specializes in working with women, a trainer who specializes in menopause or pre and postpartum coaching, respectively, or as necessary, a coach you trust enough to speak with you about sensitive subjects, and a coach who's willing to and understands the benefits of working with your allied healthcare team. Let's talk about how exercises can heal and strengthen the pelvic floor before we get into the movement itself. There is high-quality research on pre- and postnatal women showing that pelvic floor strengthening may help reduce the risk of incontinence as well as reduce the severity of pelvic floor symptoms during and after pregnancy. There is not as much research on menopause specifically, but based on this research, we can assume that the exercises performed in the pelvis and designed to strengthen the pelvis can also have effects in menopause as well. We are definitely moving towards more research in women's health, but as you know, we haven't quite gotten there yet, and we haven't gotten the attention we deserve, but hopefully we're moving in the right direction. Research shows that the strengthening of the pelvic floor should follow the same three principles of training used for other muscle groups, and that is specificity, overload, and reversibility. Specificity is the training that replicates the specific desired purpose. Overload is the muscles that refers to the muscles that are working harder than they are used to. And reversibility, when people stop training, they lose the effects that they gained. And these are standard principles used in training other muscle groups, and they can also be applied to the pelvis. So what does this mean for the pelvic floor specifically? In order to understand this, let's take a look at what fast twitch and slow twitch fibers are responsible for. Fast twitch muscle fibers react quickly, fatigue quickly, and help maintain continence by contracting spontaneously when there is a large increase in intra-abdominal pressure. Slow twitch muscle fibers are better at sustaining a less intense contraction over time and contribute to the tone of a woman's pelvic floor. So it is important that both types of muscles are considered in training. Fast twitch fibers are targeted with quick, more intense contractions that build strength, and slow twitch fibers can be strengthened with contractions held for longer periods of time that build endurance, kind of like isometrics. Today, we will be doing basic introductory exercises designed to help you become more aware of your pelvic muscles and are mostly engaging the slow twitch fibers. So let's get moving. If you have a private space to lay down, that's great. And then you can follow along. If not, you can watch and listen and do many of these seated in a chair if you are at the office. And remember, you can go to www.themovementpath.com/lunch/or-and-learn to receive the full instructional video. So I'm just going to be playing little bits of a few exercises so that we can learn a little bit in our time today. And the other instructional full-length videos I have are anywhere from 3 minutes to 8 minutes, and really talk you through the positioning and a little bit more detail than I'll provide today. But remember, you can go to this link here and receive those videos easily, and you can have them forever to refer to. But first, we're going to try the connection breath. So the connection breath is something that you can implement with your other training. So once you learn it, once you practice it without moving, you can implement it into your training and pair it with other exercises. So it's so let's talk about it and do it. And then I'll give you an example of how you can integrate it into your training moving forward. So you'll want to lie down, either lie down with your legs bent and your feet on the floor, or sit upright in a chair supported against the back of your chair with your feet evenly on the ground. So you can be leaning back into a chair, or you can be sitting upright if that's comfortable. What you want to think about is your sits bones making contact with the chair. If you're in a chair, so that you're comfortably, your knees would be at a 90-degree angle, and you can move the meat out of your way. I like to say that when you think about your sits bones are under there, but you might need to move your meat out of the way to feel them, but it helps to ground yourself on those bones. If you're laying down on your back, you want your lower back in contact with the floor. So that's why bending your knees is a nice way to achieve that. So once you are in that position, or in the position of choice, you want to place your hands on your abdomen. Now we're going to take inhales into your abdomen and feel your hands raise with your belly. So relax your muscles on your inhale and exhale naturally. Do this for a few more breaths and really try to feel your muscles relax on your inhale. Feel all the muscles that you can feel relax on your inhale. And then exhale naturally or reflexively. A few more times. Inhale, relax your belly, relax your diaphragm, relax your pelvic floor if you can feel it. A couple more times. Inhale, relax, exhale naturally. So now as we exhale, I want you to think about your pelvic floor and engage it and contract it if you can, attempting to move it up like an elevator. So we'll do the same thing with our inhale. Inhale, relax everything that you can feel. And as you exhale, engage your pelvic floor and think about moving it up towards your belly button. Let's try again. Take a nice big inhale, relax everything. Now, as you exhale, pull your pelvic floor up towards your belly button. You can even think about trying to pick something up with your vagina while you contract your muscles. So like you're pulling a tissue out of a tissue box or something like that. Sometimes a visual like that really helps. Couple more times. Inhale, relax your belly, relax your pelvic floor. And as you exhale, contract your pelvic floor, pull it up towards your belly button, pick up that tissue, and relax. A couple more times. Inhale, relax your belly, relax your pelvis, relax your diaphragm, and exhale and contract your pelvic floor, pulling it up towards your belly button on the contraction. One more time. Inhale, relax it all, and exhale, contract that pelvic floor, pull it up towards your belly button. That is the connection breath. It's a little different than Kegels. It's not a quick contraction. It's a nice slow contraction. And it's also a nice way to feel the relaxation as well as the contraction, because it is very important that you're not only able to contract your pelvic floor, but you're also able to relax it, just as important. So having this is a way to just establish a relationship with your pelvic floor. And if you couldn't feel the engagement, don't worry. You can continue practicing this protocol, and you will eventually be able to feel a little bit more. If it's not something you've ever done before, I can imagine that you might not feel the engagement. So don't be hard on yourself. Don't lose faith. It will happen. You will be able to um, get in contact with your pelvic floor. It's just this education alone helps you become more aware, helps you get into your body a little bit more and understand the anatomy and understand what you're doing. So you can think about when you inhale, if you think about your whole core, like that canister, like that soda can, on your inhale, your diaphragm goes up and your pelvic floor drops. And on the exhale, your diaphragm moves down and your pelvic floor moves up. So it's like a smaller space on the exhale. So inhale, you make the big space. Exhale, you make a smaller space, and everything's working together. So the more that you can try to feel what's happening, the more connected you will be in order to then move forward and incorporate that with other movements. So let me take a minute and talk about that. So once you get used to this connection breath and you are working to strengthen your pelvis, you can incorporate this into your training, as I mentioned. And what you would do, don't even have to be moving your lower body. You could be doing a bicep curl, for instance. So what you want to think about is on the easier part of the exercise, which would be the straightening of your arm in a bicep curl, for example. On your inhale, you can relax everything. And on your exhale, on the harder part, on your exhale, you would contract that pelvis and that pelvic floor up. That's an example of how you can incorporate the connection breath into your training, even when you're not working on your pelvis. It's pretty cool. So let's move forward. So this is a funny still of me, but here's a video. I have a few videos that I'm going to play. I'm going to keep the sound off and I'm going to talk over the video. Since it's a longer video, it won't make sense if I just play the sound. So what we're doing here, I'm sitting in what would you call it? A bear sit. And I can either be with my back against the wall, or I'm supported with my hands behind me. So you can choose whether you want to be propped up against a wall or just leaning back onto your hands. And what you're thinking about here is keeping your knees like they're allergic to each other. So we're moving back and forth in a windshield wiper position. Your sits bones are leaving the floor. You're not trying to nail down your pelvis. You're letting your pelvis move freely with your knees. And your knees, by applying pressure to one another, you're creating pressure within your hip capsule, which is important for hip mobility. And the hip mobility and the pressure applied to the hip capsule also affects the pelvic floor muscles because everything's connected. So by applying that pressure into the hips, we are generating more synovial fluid, which is great for mobility and creating more space in the hip, and also engaging the pelvic floor muscles. So I'm going to stop talking and play here. And you can see that I'm moving slowly and moving my knee, one knee at a time toward the floor, but I'm lifting, 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 and I'm not moving my other knee until I can't possibly move to the other side without moving my knee. So by holding that tension, we're creating some tension within the hip capsule itself. And this improves hip mobility, which I believe is incredibly important for the overall health of the pelvis and does directly affect the muscles of the pelvic floor. This is a bear sit windshield wiper. And you can think about driving the knee down toward the floor as much as is comfortable. Everyone has a different range of motion, but as we explore that range of motion and work with our internal and external rotations, we can increase the range of motion over time, which can allow for more strength to be built within the hip. We see too many hip replacements, and we can avoid them with exercises like this and exercises targeted to the hip itself, the mobility of the hip itself. Lovely. I hope you tried that. And if not, then I hope you will have the full video sent to you by making sure to register. Okay, now we're going to move on to a anterior and posterior tilt. So this is basically a tuck and tilt. If you're familiar with tucking your pelvis and tilting it back, maybe from dance or from other movement that you have done, you may be familiar with this movement. So the anterior tuck is basically as you're lying down in this position, you would tuck your pelvis and press your lower back into the ground. You're basically moving your pubic bone back towards your belly button. And when you tilt, you're moving your pubic bone down towards the ground, and your sits bones back towards your lower back. When you're tucking, you are engaging you're contracting your pelvis. And when you're tilting it back, you're relaxing it in this case. And you can actually reverse that and reverse your breathing with this same exercise and achieve a slightly different result, which is pretty cool with that the breath can have that power. Belly button. So it's hard to see really because it's a slight movement. But when I tilt my pelvis, my lower back leaves the floor a little bit. And when I tuck, I press my lower back into the floor, my hip bones raise just a little bit, and I'm pulling my pubic bone towards my belly button. And I hold that there for just a couple of seconds, and then I'm tilting, pressing my sits bones into the ground. And if you're sitting on a chair, you can do this just as easily if you don't want to lay down, if you're not able to lay down. When you're tucking, you're pressing your lower back into the floor or flexing your spine. And as you're tilting, you're pressing your sits bones back and letting your lower back arch or extend. And so as you're tucking, you are contracting. And as you're tilting, you're relaxing. So this is just an opportunity to go through movement and feel the contraction versus the relaxation with a pelvic movement specifically. And that can be combined with the breath. And this is really the opposite of the connection breath in this case, since I'm asking you to contract on the inhale, or Actually, that's not true. I'm sorry. You can contract on the exhale and relax on the inhale. That makes perfect sense. But I also mentioned you can reverse your breathing as you get a little more comfortable with this movement and play around with that breath and how that feels. Okay, let's move on to the next exercise. Nice and simple. These are very straightforward that, and everyone, these are safe for everyone. Nice and introductory so that we just get used to how the pelvic floor can engage, how we can utilize different movement to engage the pelvic floor. This is a pelvic clock. So I want you to think about your pelvis like a rectangle. Like think of the pelvic girdle. So at the top of the pelvic girdle, you have your front hip bones, the bones that you maybe can feel under that meat there in the front where I'm touching right there in the video. Those are your hip bones. And then you have your sits bones in the back that are actually spelled S-I-T-Z. And everyone thinks that, oh, it's because you're sitting on them that they're called sits bones, but I'm not sure that that's the case, but they are actually called sits bones with a Z at the end. And so think about those 4 bones. Now, what I'm asking you to do in a pelvic clock is to give each bone an opportunity to drive toward the floor. So you're tucking your pelvis in this, like the same movement that we were doing in the previous video, tucking your pelvis to drive your front hip bones towards the floor. They're not obviously going to touch, but you're pressing your front hip bone in towards the floor. And then you're moving over to the other side to press that other front hip bone towards the floor. And then you're tilting your pelvis in order to make contact or to try to make contact with the sits bone and the floor. So you're giving each of your 4 bones an opportunity to drive toward the floor in one direction, in one clockwise direction, and then in a counterclockwise direction. So think about one point moving towards the floor at any given time. And you are also tilting and tucking while you're moving through. And so it's really, you're trying to establish a little more movement in your pelvis. And by doing that, you are engaging different parts, different muscle groups within the pelvic floor. So take a minute and try that. Think of your pelvis like a clock. You're trying to drive each bone of your girdle down toward the ground, giving each an opportunity to drive toward the floor. And you're tucking and tilting. You're not trying to keep anything still. You're moving your body as much as you can to achieve that pelvic clock. I'm shifting my weight over to one side, and I'm basically tucking and tilting while staying on one side, and then moving over to the other side, tucking and tilting in order to drive each bone toward the ground. And this just brings more awareness and movement to your pelvis. It's just another opportunity to get to know your body and what it's capable of. You can use your breath here as well, inhaling and exhaling as you're tilting and tucking. You can go in the opposite direction as well. And of course, once again, I can mail all of these videos to you in their full capacity with all of the audio included as well. Okay, let's move on here. to the next one, and it will be standing, I believe, and we'll be utilizing, oh no, sorry, not yet. This is a spinal flexion and extension. And this can be done seated in a chair as well, or on the floor. It can be done with your feet out in front of you, kind of in a more comfortable sit. If the cross-legged position doesn't work for you, you can have something propped under your hips in order to be more comfortable in this position. And I'm basically, we're going through spinal flexion and extension, which is like a cat-cow, a seated cat-cow, and I'm using the leverage of my hands on my knees and the leverage of my arms to pull me forward and to help me pull back. So as I'm in a flexion there, I'm moving into an extension there. So what's happening with my pelvis is I am moving back onto my the back of my sits bones, basically. Here, my pelvis is tucked, and there I'm tilting, I'm moving to the front of my sits bones. And the spinal mobility is important for pelvic floor function. As part, we saw that the muscles are attached to the coccyx, which is our lower spine. So important that we are utilizing our spinal mobility and our access to move our spine to also affect our pelvic health. So there's so much going on there in the pelvis, as we saw in our anatomy diagrams. So just a little note to include your spine in your exercises, in your mobility exercises, and in any strength consideration that you are applying to the pelvis. We're simply moving to the front of the pelvis here and tucking back and sitting on the sits bones. Spinal segmentation on your knees is also a nice one to think about, moving your pelvis as well. Center mode. I hope that this is okay on your screen. Okay. Moving on. This is a hinge. So it's a hinge with breath. So you can stand up, and you might be familiar with hinges if you do Romanian deadlifts, or if you're just performing hinges. And what we're doing in a hinge is we're shooting our hips back towards the wall behind us and moving forward with a proud chest and a straight spine. And you can do this with the connection breath. This is an example of how you can pair the connection breath with your training. So a hinge, I'm demonstrating moving my hands down like I'm maybe holding a bar here. And you go down as far as you can while keeping your chest proud and your hips back. You're not in a squat. You're not trying to bend your knees into a squat. You're hinging at the hips to try to achieve a 90-ish degree angle with your torso to the floor. Or sorry, a parallel to the floor, but 90 to your hips. So we're pushing the hips back into a hinge. On the inhale, which is the less challenging part of the exercise, hinging back on the inhale, relaxing your pelvis. And as you pull up to standing, which is the more engaging part, the harder part of the exercise, you're going to pull up on your pelvic floor. and utilizing the connection breath paired with that exercise. So as you're leaning down, you're inhaling, pushing your hips back toward the back wall. And as you stand, you're exhaling. And I'm moving nice and slow here to make sure that you can relax your muscles. And when you stand, you're engaging your muscles, pulling your pelvic floor up like an elevator, practicing like we did in that connection breath. Lovely. Okay, I think this is the last exercise here. Kinetic squat with breath. So a kinetic squat is a lovely way to practice squats, and we're not going down far here. You can do this either with a shallow squat or a deep squat. But getting the feeling and getting the intention is what's most important here. So a kinetic squat engages the regressive and progressive tissues of your thighs and your anterior and your posterior chain. So when you lower into a squat, you think about pulling your knees up into your chest. You know, your knees aren't going to come up into your chest, but by thinking about that, you're engaging the tissues on the front of your thighs, engaging the tissues at your hip flexors, basically. And when you stand, you are engaging all of the tissue on the backside of your body. So your glutes, your hamstrings, your calves, all of the tissue on the backside. So it's a really powerful movement, and it's intentional, and it's nice and slow, and it can be used to strengthen your hip flexors and engage, and also your knees and your ankles as well. So I'm pairing this with the connection breath as well. And when you're lowering down into the squat, you are inhaling and relaxing everything. And as you stand up, you're exhaling and pulling that pelvic floor up like an elevator. So you're inhaling and it's a lot of cueing, and pulling all of those, pulling your knees up into your chest, exhaling, pressing through your heels and engaging your entire posterior chain. You're lowering down, pulling your knees to your chest, and trying to relax your pelvic floor. And as you stand, you are engaging everything and pulling your pelvic floor up towards your belly button. This is a nice, powerful one that really puts everything together. It's a lot of things to think about. So once you've nailed the connection breath and you're really aware and you can feel that pelvis, this is a nice, powerful one to do to really drive it all home. Okay. So that is it for the movement. I hope that you enjoyed that and that you were able to utilize the movements or try some of the movements, even if you were sitting down, even if you didn't have a private place, you can definitely do some of those movements sitting in a chair and really just tilting and tucking your pelvis is a really great place to start. Other exercises that impact the pelvic floor that I wanted to share that I love, is a supported child's pose. And this involves, you might be familiar with child's pose from yoga. You make your knees nice and wide and you place a nice stack of pillows or blankets in between your legs, and you lay down on those pillows or blankets, and making sure you feel comfortable enough and it's high enough that you can relax into it. And that really allows your hips to relax and your pelvic floor to relax. Remember, it's just as important to initiate relaxation as it is to initiate contraction. So another one like that is a supported bound angle pose. So that's when you're laying on your back with your feet, the soles of your feet touching together and your legs out like in triangles. And you have pillows also underneath your legs, pillows underneath your legs so that you can relax completely in that position. So you're not, there's no stress on your lower back, there's no stress on your hips or anything, so that you're feeling completely like you're supported. And that's another way to really relax your pelvic floor muscles. Cat and cow or spinal segmentation, I mentioned this one because our spines are connected to our pelvic floor. It's important that that spinal or that mobility in the spine is considered as well when you're working on your pelvic floor. It's a nice benefit. It's a nice partner to think about. Hip cars, these are, if you know me and you know my obsession with mobility, hips are the controlled articular rotations where you're taking your hips through their full range of motion, similar to something we were doing with the windshield wipers, but a little bit more of a full range of motion. RDLs with weights, Romanian deadlifts with weights are also nice to support as an added load to a pelvic exercise. And squats, of course, deep squats or weighted squats. I'm a big fan of the deep squat if you can achieve that, but you definitely need to work on hip mobility, ankle mobility, and knee mobility if you're not quite there. Those other things to think about when going into a deep squat. Okay, I think that's it with the movement. And I hope you enjoyed that. But before we close, I wanted to ask if it was okay if I share my current program with you. Just a quick little peek at what I have going right now. I am hosting and coaching a couple of different programs. So I have Optimize Your Pause, which is a 12-week on-demand menopause fitness intensive designed to ditch the yo-yo diet and activate your self-love. So this is it's a coaching opportunity, and there are one-on-ones involved as well. It's a do it with you program, so I'm there with you 100% of the way. But the on-demand part is that it's virtual and you can do it on your own time, do most of the modules on your own time, and meet with me to make sure that we're tracking your progress and working on your specific goals. And that's a 12-week intensive geared towards menopause fitness. And then I also have a 360 coaching opportunity, and that's a 4-week one-on-one coaching experience tailored to your unique goals and fitness level. So that's just a little bit of a shorter time period and a 4-week commitment as opposed to the 12-week commitment. So I do have that available at both of those at a significant discount. If you mention that you watched this, or you're either here live or you watched the replay, just mention that and book a call with me, and we can get you all set up there. And here is my QR code to book a call. And everything is on the Movement Path website to take a closer, deeper dive at the programming. And I'd love to chat with you about it. So thank you for letting me take that time, and thank you for your time and attention. I really do appreciate spending this time with me and learning a little bit more about your pelvis and about your body. I truly believe that we all become more empowered when we become more aware, that we become more able to manage our bodies when we understand them. And we do have tremendous control over our health and our wellness. So I definitely want to, if I've taught you nothing else, that's hopefully what I've imparted here. And remember to register for this session to receive the full-length videos I shared here today. Remember, even if you're watching the replay, you can still register and I'll send those videos your way, and they'll have plenty of instruction included. And there's, I think, a couple of more that I'll include that I didn't show you today. So whatever you do, remember to keep moving, most important. So I hope to hear from you soon, and take care. Thank you.